Good evening. My name is Michael Hunter Schwartz, and I'm the Dean of the McGeorge School of Law. And I want to thank you for being here tonight. I suspect you, like I am, incredibly excited to hear from our outstanding panelists and our great moderator, so I will be short in my welcome remarks. On behalf of the Law School and the Capital Center for Law and Policy, I want to welcome you to this year's Belote lecture. And somewhere here is Mike, but I've lost it. Ah, there he is. I was actually thanking Mike. It's a kind of an obligation of the job, but I really do want to thank Mike for sponsoring this lecture. Every year I get really excited about what we're going to talk about this time, and this is the kind of thing that elevates our law school when we're talking about the real important things that we need to be thinking about as a society. And we couldn't do this without the support of alumni like Mike. And so if you could please join me in thanking Mike, I'd appreciate it. Our topic, as I think you all know, is corporate responsibility beyond the bottom line. And we really do regard this as the premier annual event for the Capital Center. And I encourage you to keep an eye on it to see what we're going to pull off for next year as well. Aside from my thank you to Mike, I also want to thank three of the McGeorge people who gave a lot of their time preparing for this event. Mindy Danavaro over in the back corner there. Cassandra Fernandez, who I missed one. There she is. And John Wainwright, who is the director of our Capital Center. I also want to thank the Sterling Hotel for having us here tonight. And I especially want to thank our speakers, two of whom are outstandingly accomplished McGeorge alums, Matina Cole-Catranis and Mark Leonard. And then I also want to thank Jessica Hubbard and, of course, our moderator, who I will introduce now. His name is Michael Hiltzik. I think I got that right. Perfect. He is a business columnist for the Los Angeles Times. He's been a foreign correspondent for the LA Times as well, serving as the Nairobi bureau chief and a Moscow correspondent. He's also been a financial staff writer, editor, and columnist. He's done pretty well in the awards thing as well. He won a Silver Gavel Award from the American Bar Association for his reporting on issues relating to litigation boom. A Gerald Loeb Award for his contributions to financial journalism, and a Pulitzer Prize for a series he co-wrote on corruption in the music industry. So you are in incredibly good hands, and that allows me to sit down and listen.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael, and thanks, Mike, to you and to the whole McGeorge community for having us. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening, this waterlogged evening, to talk about a topic that's gotten a lot more attention, I think, in the last few years than it had in the decades before that, and that's corporate social responsibility. At one point or another in the next hour or so, I'm sure all of our panelists will offer their own definitions of this term that conform to their own particular positions in the business community, but I'm going to briefly take the moderator's privilege to lay down a couple of markers, and my colleagues up here will be free to agree, disagree, or comment as they see fit. In the most general terms, I think social responsibility means a business taking a broad view or a broader view of its relationship with its stakeholders other than its owners or shareholders. This can mean employees, customers, suppliers, and the communities where they're located or do their work. It doesn't necessarily mean giving up profits or steering revenues to one group of stakeholders at the expense of others, although it could. But I think most businesses will tend to see a recognition of their social responsibilities as something that eventually, in the long term, will manifest itself as a positive for their bottom line, or even their top lines and their bottom lines. The evidence that corporations have taken their social responsibilities more seriously today is all around us. I don't only mean in those pages, on those pages of corporate websites that are headlined our corporate social responsibility. Everybody does that. But managements of public corporations are confronted at almost every annual meeting now with shareholder resolutions on ESG or environment. Managers are being held to stricter standards than ever in the past on issues of personal behavior, especially on sexual and gender issues. Just this week, Gillette stepped into the whirlwind of gender-driven behavior with a commercial that you may have seen or heard about. This was a Super Bowl commercial that they brought out early that urged its male customers to be more self-aware of the potential for toxic masculinity as it applies to bullying, sexual harassment, and sexual discrimination. We will see how that works for Gillette. For the ad has already inspired praise from those who agree and condemnation from critics who have tweeted that they'll be buying their razor blades in the future from Schick. Anyway, we'll be hearing a lot more about all these things. So let me introduce our panelists who represent a gratifyingly diverse range of business modes and models. On my far right, we have Mark Leonard, who is General Counsel of the Jelly Belly Candy Company. It's a private, family-owned company that's located, I think, about an hour or so from here in Fairfield, right? Traffic permitting. On Mark's left is Martina Kalakatronas, who is with the Sacramento Kings, and a business organization that I think needs no introduction. And on my immediate right, Jessica Hubbard, former Director of Social Responsibility at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and currently a consultant in the CSR field. To get us started, I'd like each of our panelists.
Good business sense, in addition to being a good corporate citizen in the area. Our visitor center, they donate meeting rooms for community events, are very active in a number of local charities, and so that's they want to be a good neighbor, and that's good for business, and that's certainly the ethos I found when I got there, and that's something that management at the company certainly thinks a lot about.
Want to say anything? Is this on? Nope. On now? Okay. Thank you, Dean, for including me in this panel. Michael, thank you so much also. Fellow panelists, hello. Hello. So I work for the Sacramento Kings. I think everybody in this room who lives in Sacramento or knows about Sacramento identifies Sacramento with the Sacramento Kings. And we are very lucky in that regard. When the new ownership group took over this team, we sat down and we thought about our mission statement and what was important to us. And everybody's heard bigger than basketball. That's kind of a tagline, but we thought about, okay, what does that really mean in our day-to-day business? And the premise of what we thought about was the team would really not be here but for the fans and the employees in the city who really rallied to save a team that was on its way out to Georgia, Seattle. And so how do we give back to that community? So we come from the perspective of we don't really own the team, but the employees and the fans and the city and everybody that works so hard to keep the team here are our owners. In that regard, we really set out to build something when we started our arena, something that was iconic and something that the city really deserved. And we thought about it as a public gathering space, someplace where people could go to celebrate, obviously watch games, but also someplace, as you saw in April, where people would go to protest. So, it's a place where people can come and speak their mind. Aside from that, we also thought about sustainability and giving the city of Sacramento, our food program is very unique in that we source 90% of our food from 150 acres, and we thought that was really important for the community. The solar panels are really important when we talk about sustainability, and also our foundation, which does work in the community every single day. So we really feel like we're stewards of the team. We don't own the team, and when we come from a premises like that.
Excellent. I'm Jessica Hubbard. I'm a corporate responsibility consultant. Most people probably don't realize that's a career that you can have. The way I think about corporate responsibility is the many, many ways that companies engage with the social and environmental issues that create risk and opportunity for the company. So the bulk of my clients are relatively large companies who, and I do strategic planning work with them to help them do better align their community engagement work with their business and their social goals. I first did this work about 15 years ago in a previous round of consulting in my career, and in 2004, when many of our clients were companies coming to us saying, we give away a fair amount of money, several $100,000, a few $1 million, but we don't feel like we're having an impact. We don't feel like we're having a social impact. We don't feel like we're having an impact on our company either. And we think that there's more here, but we don't know what it is. We don't get a lot of clients like that anymore because 15 years later, most companies have a stronger sense of what it means to be a socially responsible company, what best practices look like, how you engage with the community in a way that's strategic. And the idea that it is strategic is much more widely held than it was 15 years ago. Before, we got a lot of companies saying we do this because it's the right thing to do. I think a lot of companies still believe that, but they also recognize that it's an imperative from a business perspective as well. So a lot of the clients we have now are companies that say, we have this initiative, we've been running it for 5 years, our business context has changed, we're not sure what about our activities are driving our social and business goals, and we're not sure where there's opportunities to be doing better work and to be more efficient with our resources. So I think very much, as Mike said up front, this is an area that is increasing attention. He mentioned ESG. I was shocked recently to find that as of the beginning of 2018, 26% of U.S. professionally managed assets in the U.S. are invested with an ESG theory of some sort, where the investors are saying we have some social impact criteria that goes beyond strictly business. But, that's really missaid, because it's not that it goes beyond strictly business, it's that they believe business outcomes are correlated with companies that have a responsible approach to how they think about the environment, how they think about governance, and how they think about their social impact. So there's a big debate, or there has been at points in history, a big debate about whether companies should or even should be allowed to invest in social impact. I think that to a significant extent, it's sort of a matter of semantics, because there's so much opportunity for companies to do more good in a way that drives their business goals, that maybe we'll get to the point someday where we talk about, do they have a responsibility to go beyond that? But right now, there's so much running room where everyone can be on the same page, that I think that there's a lot of opportunity for all of us.
Well, thank you all. Martina, I was interested in what you said about the King's devotion to sustainability. And that certainly is an issue of social responsibility. And I think it's one that corporations are taking much more seriously today and see it as something that their customers want. But there's another aspect of social responsibility which might be interpreted as more political. One customer's social responsibility may be another's interference with their privacy or political correctness. So I'd like to ask each of you, how do you assess the limits on what a business can and should do? We've seen what's been happening with Gillette a few years ago. Target announced, or at least reiterated an old policy about allowing transgender customers to use the bathrooms of their choice. That created a huge backlash in the South that I think cost them sales, at least for a period of time. So how do you assess the limits, and how do you avoid crossing the limits? So Martina, why don't you start, and then Jessica and Mark, you can each take that on.
It's very interesting. Like, we look at it as, first of all, we're very lucky because we're in the NBA, which is an incredibly progressive league They, have best practices, and we push the limit on those practices. And we do come at it like, does this make business sense? But then also, how do we make it make business sense when we really want to do something? So, I think that, like, if you think about our partnership after when they shut our building down because of the tragedy that our community suffered, Vivek was very bold in taking the floor and saying, Black Lives Matter. Not a lot of other owners were willing to go out that far. But for us, it was really important. It was really important to our players at that time. Our building was closed down. There was a debate as to whether or not we were going to play the game. The players were like, our community is in pain, So we decided as an organization to, like, not only make that statement, but then also follow through. Like, what does that mean? So we partnered with Bill Black. We ran youth leagues within our community. We have a recording studio where we're bringing underprivileged youth in. I mean, it's something that very much aligns with who we are, and it makes sense for us as part of what we'll be giving back to the community who's given so much to us. And yes, of course, there's always pushback sometimes. Sometimes when you're doing something, people will, you put them in an uncomfortable zone, but if you can walk them through why this makes sense for your customer, get right back in.
I think it's been a really interesting shift, this increase in political engagement by companies in the last, just the last couple of years. Not too long ago, companies were really happy to invest in education and, breast cancer and a lot of other causes where there was no two sides. And it's only been in the last few years that companies have gotten a lot braver around engaging with issues where there is a lot more controversy.
Yeah, I would say when we were first opening the building, one of the things we did was we had gender-neutral restrooms. And initially people were like, oh my God, why do you need those? And then California passed the law, so you're mandated to have gender-neutral bathrooms. So I feel like sometimes you just have to be willing to be bold. And Vivek really does push us to think about stuff like that. Obviously, a businessman who says, like, let's also do good. And how do you do good?
Absolutely. And I think, to what you said about your employees, I think a lot of the reason companies have taken that stance is that increasingly customers expect them to not remain on the sidelines. So for sure, I think when a company is engaging with an issue that's significantly controversial, they're absolutely, maybe they're doing employee surveys, maybe they're running customer focus groups. I think very often they're not going blind. They're thinking, what will the reaction be from our customer base? What will and that matters to them, for sure. But at the same time, I think in many cases their employees matter more in that process. And then also there's, in the last several years, the sort of buzzword of choice in this space has been about corporate purpose. And for a lot of companies, they've seen the real value in saying, this is what we stand for. So Patagonia, I'm sure many of you saw, donated their recent $10 million tax cut, tax savings to environmental issues. And in some ways that's easy for them to do, right? They're a family-owned company. They don't have a lot of don't have any shareholders. They don't have a lot of stakeholders beyond their core themselves. But I think that's something that wasn't controversial because everybody knows that's who Patagonia is, and that's who they are as a company. So that only reinforced what people expected to see from them, what people wanted to see from them. So I think for a lot of companies, they're able to take this stronger stand on issues that have been controversial in the past because they've come out as standing for something broader than just their product in the marketplace.
And Mark, for Jelly Belly, as you said, it's a very community-oriented enterprise. Does that company or your company ever run into those issues of how far should you go, how much, how deeply you should participate in a community issue, one sort or another?
Well, that's your question made me think about it, and I think obviously Matina's organization has a very different level of engagement with their customers versus our level of engagement with our customers, and thinking about the brand and what it represents. Companies to engage in some potentially contentious issues, and there's could be good reasons for doing so, either from a business standpoint or because of their own sense of corporate responsibility. But I think we've always thought of ourselves as, do you really want to get controversial about candy? It's not to diminish the importance of being perhaps more engaged in some more controversial issues, but I think you really have to think about your company, your customers, your culture, And does, as Jessica said, Patagonia, a no-brainer on that made a lot of sense for them. Obviously, the level of engagement with the community, having literally had the community keep the team here, makes more sense for the Kings. But we are not going to, do any kind of endorsement or anything like that as a company. We want to, maintain as, a neutral, fun place. So that's probably the limit for us is we would not get into something customers or even our employees would expect of us.
Jessica, drawing a line from what you did say about Patagonia, I mean, this is a company, its customers expect a certain amount of engagement with environmental issues. And Yvonne Chouinard has, been an exemplar of that. But it does, I think, bring us to the question of what's, I think, known as social marketing, which is something, an issue that comes up, I think, every Christmas time, certainly. And it always strikes me when I read about a company saying to its customers, for every $1 you spend with us or on your Visa card or what have you, we will make a contribution to this charity or other. And I always think, well, why not just make the contribution without my participation? You don't need me as a customer to participate. What about that? I mean, I think that question and that sort of issue always, risks making a company's social responsibility look a little, cheap or fake, even, that it's just marketing. So, what do you think, or how can you avoid that? I mean, how can you actually make these sorts of efforts look sincere as they should be? And Jessica, maybe you can give us sort of the general issue, and Bettina and Mark, you can talk about, if you confronted that in your organization.
Sure. Well, there's two ways I'd react to that question that are sort of very different answers. One is based on some great research that came out recently from a consulting firm I used to work for called Changing Our World. Their report is called The Authenticity Opportunity, and it was very much about how customers expect companies to be engaged, they reward companies that they believe to be authentically engaged, and they punish companies that they believe to be inauthentically engaged. And what this research found is the markers of authenticity were several things. One was a long-term strategic engagement with the issue. A second one, property, its skills, its products, and so on. A third was endorsements from third parties like nonprofits. But the fourth and the most relevant here is skin in the game. So if all you're doing is raising money from your employees and your customers and acting as though you've made this amazing donation, customers see right through that. If you're doing that in partnership with your employees and your customers, and you are making a donation and you're sort of leveraging your place in the community to multiply that by raising from your constituents, then that's great. But you really need to have your own skin in the game as well. The flip side of that is, I said earlier that I think corporate responsibility is engaging with the social issues that create risk and opportunity for the company. And so in a lot of ways, there's a lot of social issues that create an opportunity for a company to raise money by their marketing. And I think if this is one tactic that a company uses, if they say we care about childhood hunger, and so we address that issue by donating. We're a food company, we donate products, we advocate for laws that will serve childhood hunger needs. We think about using our fleet of trucks or whatever to help food banks move product, and we do this. We have a cereal box, and we say for every $1, every box sold will donate $1. I think that's completely appropriate. It's just you have to be clear about the fact that this is a marketing project that happens to have a social impact, and the social impact is great, but it's marginal. It's a plus. It's not the purpose of the initiative. You have other initiatives where the purpose is the social impact.
I think that in our organization, people in the community look to us when a crisis occurs to see, what are the Kings going to do? And a lot of times we get the question, how can we help? So whenever there's a flood, or say, for instance, with the fires in Paradise, we think people will, we have an obligation that we're going to give. So why not? People are looking to where can we go, and where is a sound investment that we can make and we're able to direct them. I mean, they trust our brand. I'll say the fires, one of the things we thought about was a charity concert, and we were thinking a benefit concert. We were thinking about how to put it together. As it turns out, after our new governor, Gavin Newsom, won, his organization wanted to do a benefit concert, and they had called Golden One, and we were like, you know, if it's bipartisan, we will participate with you in order to, you know, we can give our building without cost, and we can help you. We ended up getting people, and then, you know, we ended up selling together. We have 17,000 fans that are always, you know, that we can always leave this open to opportunity, and obviously they did a tremendous job, and they raised over $5 million. So for us, you know, we feel like when there is a tragedy, what can we do? And when we're doing it, we often have, you know, premium customers, we have sponsors who are always calling and saying, what are you gonna do? We will match it. So it's become a way that we engage within the community.
Getting back to your original question about authenticity, it was funny. When I was talking with my CEO about what she wanted me to talk about, she actually didn't want me to talk about much of any of this. The company doesn't market their social responsibility or a lot of their charitable efforts. I bet nobody outside of the company knows that the family matched employee donations to the Red Cross for hurricane relief last year, or that we immediately offered our visitor center as an evacuation center for the Napa fires. It's the right thing to do, but it would really grate on certainly the family, and I think, you know, probably you know, some employees and others in the community to be somehow leveraging what they think they should be doing anyway as a good corporate citizen to try to get publicity from that. It's the right thing to do, and I think that's why it is, you know, such a revered brand, in part because of that authenticity. While the company is doing these efforts, it's the people that it's affecting are finding out about that, but you're not seeing it, you know, you're not reading about it in the newspapers or splashed all over social media.
Yeah, actually, the term leveraging was one that was on the tip of my tongue before you mentioned it. And I think that's important. And Bettina, I think I'm glad that you mentioned the efforts that the Kings have taken in relation to Paradise, because it seems to me those are important ways that a company that's got resources can put them at the service of the community or the stakeholders without necessarily making a big deal of it, but using them to help.
Yeah, when it occurred, we knew we were going to do something. We have like a couple of days of service we do as an organization, so we immediately thought, well, that's one day of service we can plan at some point in the future. You know, we're lucky we have a venue, so it's easy for us to throw a benefit concert, right? We have acts, we know, like, so we started brainstorming that, and then when the opportunity came to have the governor actually put the event on in a bipartisan manner, we kind of took a back seat, and we didn't even, you know, we were a sponsor, but you didn't hear about it in the newspaper or anything. We just did the concert, we provided the acts, and, you know, it was a really tremendous way to raise a substantial amount of money and do some real good and help our community heal.
Right now, a lot of what we've talked about thus far involves company policies or corporate efforts. But of course, all these efforts require the participation of individuals. And I know we've seen in some fields you will see workers or partners or associates being told that a certain amount of community work or pro bono work is expected. We certainly see that in law firms, maybe in accounting firms, but in professional context, where you, in a sense, can get graded for how much you do that's sort of off the clock. Bettina and Mark, whether it's in terms of what they expect employees or executives to do in the community? And then Jessica, maybe you can talk about how much of that is appropriate or wise or legal.
We allow our employees to do up to 50 hours that we're paying for, and they just need to, we have somebody who actually tracks it so that they can, and then we have our day of service. And obviously, we're in a very unique position because we're out in the community every day. So they can volunteer for what they feel is, where they want to be. And, it's not mandatory, but most people meet that limit. And then above and beyond that, we encourage our issues that they are comfortable with.
We don't have as formal a policy being talked to employees a certain amount of paid time to do community engagement. But certainly for me personally, when I came on board, before I came on board, one of the issues is I do volunteer for these different organizations, California Lawyers for the Arts, involved in a couple of other organizations. So I am going to need the flexibility to be able to do that. And it was like, well, of course, who wouldn't? Yeah. And so that was very refreshing to me, having colleagues, and I'm sure we all, know other folks at firms or in-house where they're chained to their desk, and you're just all about, working for the company, and doing anything outside of that is a big ask, and that was not for me. So.
When I was at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, our policy was 16 hours of paid release time for volunteers, and 50 hours is really generous. That's amazing. I think 16 hours at the time was about average. It's probably gone up a little since then, since this is an increasingly popular kind of a program. I think particularly you mentioned pro bono service. That's an area that's seen a lot of growth in the last several years. Companies looking to, as I mentioned earlier, use their strategic assets. So not have people painting a school building, although we certainly did that, but have people use their core professional skills to serve nonprofits. I think it's a little tricky with lawyers from a CSR manager perspective, because I imagine that there are some legal or ethical or professional norms and rules around pro bono service that I, as a non-lawyer, don't know anything about. So I think that to take a little bit of a leadership role and coach your CSR department through that process so that you can do that together.
I would agree that we do not do liability associated with that, and it's not an area that we're comfortable in right now. We're not a law firm. We have a general counsel. I'm a lawyer, but we don't practice day to day. We have another lawyer, so we do encourage, obviously, the legal department to participate in community activities, but not, and on their off time, they can, I asked Jeff, our Dorso, our general counsel, he used to, but isn't doing more nonprofit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Counsel that I know, well, their company may be very supportive of them being, in volunteer engagement, but actually providing legal advice to another person or entity, I think raises a host of issues. This actually came up last year. Probably a lot of people in the room know that there was a mandatory pro bono bill considered by the legislature, and the in-house community, was one of the ones who reached out and said, well, regardless if this is a good idea or not, you're creating huge issues for this entire class of lawyers in the state who only have one client, and it's very problematic to then ask that attorney to go, however noble the cause might be, it just raises ethical issues, and thankfully, from my perspective, thankfully, the author decided to drop the bill. So.
Now another aspect of what we've been talking about that I want to sort of move outside. We've been talking about what businesses can do in terms of social responsibility within their four walls, so to speak, and within their own organizations. But certainly there's been a lot more attention being paid in recent years to the supply chain and to corporate to responsibility there. And I think we see businesses, particularly public companies, talking more and more about responsible sourcing. So what have you? I don't know Jelly Belly's relationship is with its sources, but I assume you get sugar from outside. Matina, maybe the Kings get, buy uniforms. I mean, how much attention can you or should you pay to what your suppliers are doing and how they are taking on this issue of corporate social responsibility? And Jessica, you can give us some context too.
Well, it's really an extension of just how the company operates and how they've always operated. So you're not going to cut corners. It's a premium product with premium ingredients. We could talk for hours about the domestic sugar market, Michael, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole as ethically as possible. Even doing the right thing sometimes, depending on the issue, and there can be a lot of hysteria, frankly, over a particular issue, and there's no way to educate your customers that, oh no, we've actually been doing this right the whole way, and so we reformulated to get rid of palm oil.
A lot of our products or merchandise, the league handles that. It's all licensed through them, so they're very careful. They're very progressive and they're very careful. Locally, one of the things I talked about early was the sustainability in the food. We're very much into locally sourcing our food. We think it's good for the environment. It's also good for our community to get our business locally. Like for instance, we did away with straws in the building because starting next year, because of the plastic issue. So we do take a look at those issues. I was thinking about on Monday we did Meatless Monday, and when we announced it in the arena, everybody booed us. And I was watching the game someplace else, and I must have had I don't know how many text messages. They hate Meatless Monday. We told you so. I was like, okay. We just feature one item in the arena that's meatless. It's not nobody's taking your hot dogs away. It's gonna be okay. We're locally sourced anyways. But so you never, you try things, and sometimes I just had a laugh.
Yeah, I do think that for a lot of companies, this is very critical because customers do care so much. And customers, as we saw, this is for a long time, customers have been willing to boycott and otherwise punish companies like Nike and Gap in the 90s for what happened in their suppliers' spheres of influence. So companies are very much, I think, held accountable for what their suppliers do. Customers don't care if they own the factory or if there's just or one of 1,000 customers of the factory. I worked at with a company that was helping them develop a paper sourcing policy. So they were looking at what % of the company's products were made from recycled paper and what % were made from Forest FSC certified. I don't remember what that stands for anymore, but sustainably sourced paper. And the reason it came up, it was something that the company sort of was thinking about and sort of cared about, but the reason it came up and became an issue when it did is because an activist organization created a guide right around Christmas time saying these are the companies that are doing a good job in this area, and these are the companies that are doing a bad job in this area, and you shouldn't buy from them. This was an activist organization that had a history of handcuffing itself to the Disneyland gates in protest over some of Disney's environmental choices. So it was absolutely on the company's radar as a concerning stakeholder. And so that really raised the visibility of the issue inside the company. And the company was doing great stuff already, but we had to marshal the information, marshal the story, marshal the resources. In a lot of cases, it was just documenting what they were already doing. And then in some cases, it was being more ambitious about what they were trying to do, but very much driven by the potential for bad press.
Okay, I know we started a little bit late, so I want to make sure that we leave time for questions and comments from the floor. So if anybody does have a question for any of our panelists, now is the time to step up. I don't know if you want to take a microphone around. There's somebody in the back.
Well, you've been talking about what you do and what your clients do to try to do the right thing. But I'm wondering about examples, and even current examples, of companies. Are there ones out there that you can give that really aren't doing the right thing? and either are getting away with it or increasingly aren't, or what's happening to those companies?
I think that there's two scenarios that you see. One is companies that just are not very thoughtful about these issues. I think this is very common for big companies that are very high profile, but the vast majority of companies in this nation are small and mid-sized and are
environmental policies, labor laws, things like that. But it seems like today, increasingly, in this sort of partisan world, it's what decisions companies are making about things that are potentially less black and white, about how, what they do with, in regards to certain social policies. Consumers appear to be really attuned to that and making decisions based on that. So is there any sort of, what do you do as companies to stay above the fray? Do you choose to stay, to sort of stay above that? And do you anticipate any sort of continuing backlash in how attuned customers are to the sort of decisions that companies are making outside of these well agreed upon sort of environmental and social goods?
I think that, sometimes what I would perceive as something that's the right thing to do is not necessarily what everybody else would perceive as the right thing to do. So it made sense as an organization when our community was hurting to have Evac take center court and say that the tragedy has occurred and we're going to do something about it. That had not happened before. So I feel like sometimes you take a risk, and Vivek always pushes us in that space. And I know for myself, I've been doing this for 23 years. It better be bigger than basketball because obviously right now it's amazing basketball, right? We're over 500. We love the Kings, but there's got to be more than that on the day to day. And I think that the city has given so much to the team, and we set a platform for giving back to the city. Now, other people might think hey, that's enough. You need to be worried about, other things, but it's important to us. And I feel like we're really lucky in Sacramento because we have a really engaged fan base. And they, we do sometimes get comments about what are you doing there, but overall, they go with where we are. We set the tone and they follow.
We have a couple of questions down here, I think.
I'm interested in the aspect of what I would call corporate responsibility that starts at home, and I'm wondering how employee benefits and employee salaries weigh into the discussion, livable wage issues. I often wonder, for example, when I go to a Kings game, what the ushers are, how they're compensated, what the concession people are compensated. I just wonder, obviously the basketball players are getting tons of money, but, and not to focus just on the Kings, but I just wonder if corporate responsibility shouldn't also include that very basic issue.
Definitely. We adhere to best practices from across the league when we're talking about our part-time employees or our full-time employees.
And their union.
Yeah, they're all, thank you, Steve.
It certainly does for us. When I'm talking about, because it is a family-owned company, that really, kind of permeates their worldview. They make a number of decisions that are not good for necessarily bottom line for the business, but are for the employees. For example, when we bring in new automation, if that's going to displace any of the employees, then they're transferred to another part of the company and given an opportunity to do something else as opposed to being laid off or terminated because of now. It doesn't make the most business sense, but again, the other employees see that, and when the family says we consider you a family and we treat you that way as well, that's what breeds the loyalty that I think is that ultimately is going to give you a better business result, having engaged and very loyal employees.
So I had a question. I'm sort of curious about corporate social responsibility and a related thing, which is we're still at a point, for example, where Google's had some problems with their diversity hiring, where while there's lots of women who've made it to X level of management in the corporate world, that to get into the C-suite, it's a lot less likely. So I'm interested in your thoughts on corporate social responsibility. I recognize, of course, that we have two people who have done pretty well in the corporate world, but I'm curious about your thoughts about that.
I think that, we just got the Inclusion and Diversity Award at the MBA. So in our organization, it's a priority. And it starts from the top, back, me, and it goes throughout the organization. And I'm very conscious of how many females we have in the company and how many minorities and, how we're promoted. And, I think I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, even though most people wouldn't believe that, there's a lot of unconscious bias that goes on in this world. And I think that a lot of people hire people that look like them and act like them. So it's, if you're, for me, my sweet spot is if you're a lawyer and you're Greek, you're probably going to get a job. You know what I mean? It's just, and when I thought about it, I was like, I'm always hiring women. So I feel like you need to take a step back and really think about that. And it's true, like when there's a position open, the first thing you're going to think about is, oh, what's my Rolodex? Well, my Rolodex is lawyers, and it's women, and it's Greek. So
Certainly at a certain level, you have to.
Talking about the Rooney Rule.
The Rooney Rule in the NFL, I think, was applied to coaches that for every coaching opening, the team had to interview a black candidate, if not first, then certainly among the mix. And my question was, that's widely applicable in your organization or organizations.
Obviously, the NFL, it hasn't really pushed the envelope in their organization. Probably not. So I don't feel like you just want to check the box. I think you really need to make sustainable differences when you're talking about issues like that. And, we've, I think in our senior executives, 50% are female and minorities. And I think that's, we stand above, and, you have to practice it and you have to really think about it.
I'd start by saying that the CSR industry as a profession is pretty overwhelmingly women, and yet the senior CSR executives are more than half men. It's also an incredibly white industry, and as you probably would expect. So certainly there's a lot of room for progress, including among practitioners themselves. But I think this is a great example of a problem where what the right thing to do and the strategic thing to do are one and the same. Because as you said, the diversity of ideas, like MBA fans are not overwhelmingly white men, I would imagine. And so, and certainly not going forward.
Women are making most of the purchasing decisions within families, so we are seeing, that is really important in what we do.
So having an employee base that understands how to market to a wide array of different perspectives is a really important thing. So I think that similarly, companies with women on the board outperform companies without women on the board because they're bringing in an important perspective about the marketplace. So I think that that's a really critical thing, again, because it's the right thing to do, but also because it makes good business sense.
Yeah, it's just been my experience in seeing at the company. It's they want to hire the most qualified person, but that has resulted in a lot of diversity. Our CEO is a woman. My associate general counsel, whom I hired, a Korean American woman. And so while it is, but I agree with Martina that you have to be looking in the hiring process, looking for people who aren't simply, confirming, maybe your expectation of what this person is going to be like, based on their resume or something else. And our Shanghai subsidiary is a female Chilean expat, who had no prior experience in the confectionery industry, and yet she's turned out to be fantastic. And so you can achieve diversity, I think, without having to institute something as formal as the Rooney Rule, if it is important to your organization and you're cognizant of it. Yeah, if you start seeing, oh my gosh, this entire department is white males, maybe there's something going on with the hiring practice there that you're not thinking outside the box a little bit with some of the candidates.
Okay, there's a question back there.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to get some pointers on how to get the attention of businesses or the business community generally for an issue that may seem removed but does in fact affect people. Just very quickly, a couple years ago I was involved in organizing opposition to some legislation that, as originally introduced, would have been an attack on fundamental rights of free speech under the First Amendment. And we tried to, I wasn't personally involved in it, but some of us tried to go to chambers of commerce, because this would have affected both individuals and businesses. Chambers of commerce and businesses, and nobody seemed interested. Is there a way a good way to try to approach you or the business community generally when something like that comes along?
I'd recommend working through their employees. So as you can imagine, someone working in the nonprofits partnerships function within the company gets pretty inundated with unsolicited proposals, and it's hard to cut through that noise. But they're almost certainly going to take an email, a meeting, a call with one of their colleagues in an unrelated department who thinks that this is an important issue. And so identifying people in your network who work at companies that you're interested in partnering with, I think is an excellent first step.
So, Michael, this is a question more for you. Obviously, corporations, like everyone else, are both good and bad, and you can be the most green energy company, but if you have a spill, you've got a problem. And I'm sure PG&E does lots of good work, but now they've got issues. But one thing I've noticed over the years is very, very large companies actually getting ahead of government and bringing government along, whether it's LGBT rights or something. And it seems to me that that isn't very well publicized. Do you think that the media understands that? Do they reflect that? Because often it seems to me that corporate...
Well, leaving aside that, the news media, we're predisposed toward bad news rather than good news. I think a lot of the companies that have been in the forefront of advances on social issues have gotten a lot of publicity and a lot of coverage. And in part that's because, maybe not so much now, but when we first started Everybody got their chance.